Hi, this is David. Today I'm going to work with the rest 20 questions in the practice exam. Uh, since my boy Lucas is downstairs as well, I'm going to play some background music to counter his occasion noise. Okay, let's start. All right, so question 21. If a bank's ratio of asset to capital is 20 and its return on asset is negative 2%, what is its return on equity? Okay, so this question, I want you to be very careful because many of you, when you're doing the lab questions, you made some mistake. The biggest mistake I saw is that a lot of people they kind of have trouble with understanding that this ratio of 20 is not really 20%. Okay, you cannot simply put a number in there and add a percent and say they are the same thing. 2020 itself is 2000%. Okay, so technically that's not right. So let me show you how to get the right answer over here, all right? So my trick about these questions is that I'm going to write everything out in a fractional format. For example, bank's ratio of assets to capital, okay? So I'm going to write it's asset over capital. So since we're using return on equity, and equity and a capital are identical to each other, they're the same thing. So I'm going to just put equity over here, okay? So asset over equity is 20, not 20%, okay? And its return on asset is going to be return divided by asset. This is negative 2%, okay? And we're looking for return on equity, which is return over equity, okay? So how can I get this? Basically, you're given this information and this information. The trick is there's always one term that you can delete. Okay, you can that can cancel out from each other. So basically, I'm going to write out like this. So let me first use asset over equity over here. And then since assets is at denominator, I'm going to plug in this ratio, which is return over asset. And the good thing is that you see asset both at nominator and denominator. Okay, so you know you can cancel them out, and the final result happens to be return on equity, right? And then I'm just going to plug everything in there. Okay, so asset over equity ratio is 20. You don't have to change anything about it. And return over asset is negative 2%. So for this question, it is pretty simple. You just multiply these two numbers together. That gives you the negative 40%. Okay. Uh, okay. Uh, on the other hand, the question could be like this. All right. So this is asset to capital ratio. Okay. I can say, well, this is asset to capital ratio, right? I can definitely say the capital to asset ratio, all right, which is the leverage probably, and I'm going to say that is 1 over 20, which is 5%, okay, and that is capital to asset ratio. So it is going to give you the exactly same answer, all right? Because when you're trying to plug in the number at here, you have to get the reciprocal of this 5%, which is exactly 20. So you're going to plug in the same thing, okay? But do be careful because this 5% is actually 1 over 20, okay? So when you're taking the reciprocal, it is 20, not simply 5, all right? So that's it. Question 22. A 1-year bond currently pays 5% interest and a 2-year bond pays 5.5%. 2-year term premium is 0.2%, while 3-year term premium is 0.35%. What is the expected interest rate on 1-year bond next year according to the liquidity premium theory? Okay, so a lot of people, their problem with this type of question is that they don't know. For example, what is 5%? What is 5.5%? Okay, so don't worry, I'm going to show you two ways to get the right answer. Okay, so first of all, I need probably a bigger space over here. So let me zoom out a little bit, and let's use probably, I'm going to write a lot, so let's use a marker that is in different color. uh, okay, that's here. All right. So there's two ways you can identify it. First is that since it says 1 year bond, okay, so there will be the description of this bond will have two parts, okay. So you're gonna see a time frame before bond, and then you're going to see a time point after bond, okay. So let me give you an example. In this case, it says this is a 1 year bond. This thing tells you how long does this bond goes for, okay? And it has currently, all right? Currently is right now, but it also can say 1 year bond. For example, in the question it says 1 year bond next year, okay? So one here, if it says next year, that means it is 1 year from today. Okay, so what's the difference? Okay, what is the difference between this, right? So the biggest difference is that a lot of people is mistakenly confused between these two things. Okay, a 1 year bond is I1 t plus 1, a 1 year from today. A 2 year bond is I2t. Okay, so this is really important to see what is given over there. Okay, so let me use a graph to see what to show you the difference. Okay, so since we're trying to get a 1 year bond next year, so we're talking about something happening within 2 year period, right? So the 5% interest rate is always easy. This is the 5%, okay? But the 5.5% is a little bit tricky. Since it says it's a 2 year bond, basically you were told this is the 5.5%, okay? If you're simply taking average of 5% and 5.5%, that means you mistakenly think the 5.5% should be plugged in here, which is not right. Okay, this is actually what we are trying to get. All right, and now and after that, since this is or the x what we're looking for, I have to write out the right equation for it. Okay, so since in this question we are using liquidity premium theory, the equation looks like this. A 2 year bond interest rate will equals to the average of two short-term interest rate, one today, one year from now, divided 2, but also plus the right liquidity premium for 2 year bond. Okay, so basically after plug everything I know in there, this will be 5%. This will be the x I'm looking for, and this is 2 plus 0.2%, and that should equals to 5.5%. Or you can simply say, hey, since we're using liquidity premium theory, I know after taking the average, I'm going to add the liquidity premium. So in this graph, I'm going to minus the liquidity premium off first, which is 0.2%. And I know this after the subtraction, this becomes 5.3%, will be the average of 5% and the x. Okay, so that's exactly the same thing as solving this equation, which is I'm going to move 0.2% to the left, which gives us 5.3%. That equals to the average of 5% plus x. And eventually that tells me x equals to, so 2 times 5.3% is 10.6%. So x equals to 5.6%. Okay. And that tells me the right answer is this. Okay, so it's very important. Okay, so you need to be very clear about what this question is asking you about. Okay, we're going to see more of these questions with this practice exam. Okay, so 23, the Volcker rule addresses the off-balance sheet problem involving what? Okay, so basically, if you still remember, Volcker rule is part of the rule that we imposed to the financial market at 2010. Okay, so that is part of the Graham-Bellily Act. Okay, uh, what does it do is that it limited the trading activities of commercial banks, and it limited a lot of things. It asked the hedge fund to register all those kind of things. Okay, so in general, we're talking about trading risks. Okay, they're not other things. Okay, that's why I'm picking C. The most 24. The most important category of asset on a bank's balance sheet is what? Okay, so first of all, let's rule out everything that is not under asset. Um, Unfortunately, all four of them are under assets. Okay, so other assets is not the most important thing. Security is something bank always buy, but it is used as a cushion or just to not uh, keep all the fundings in their hand so that there's no profit being generated with this money. So security is not the main thing. And cash items in the process of collection. So if you are in counting major, is count. This is called account receivable. So basically, you are expecting someone to pay you this money. No, that's not right. But loans is the most important category in there because banks, a lot of banks, they rely on making loans to make profit. Okay, so the right answer is A. 25. The ratio of bank assets to bank capital is also known as bank leverage. So I'm not sure about what's going on with this question, but the answer is there. It is called the leverage ratio. Let me see, where's my marker? Okay, here. Okay. Um, so there are the things it can be called. Okay, so since this is asset to capital ratio, this is also called as a capital multiplier. All right, but in general, this thing, the reason that think, why we call this as a leverage is like this. All right. So you guys play with this before? Like, okay, if there's something that can balance out the whole thing, because of the distance, all right, it will be slightly different. Uh, the if the lens on the right hand side, I I code it as asset, and if we can move it, that means we can handle this bank. Okay, on the left hand side is like the capital, all right, and we call this as a leverage. Okay, when the leverage is higher, you don't have to put as many of capital in this bank to operate the huge asset over there. Okay, so you relies more on liability, which is most likely to be deposit and other stuff. Okay, um, 26. When the yield curves are downward sloping, what happens? Okay, so this is a direct uh, uh, question about whether or not you understand the yield curve is simply a curve that reflect for a bond at with different maturity. Uh, what are the yields today? So basically, if this is a 1 year bond, this is a 2 year bond, then this is the yield, and this is a yield for this bond. Okay. But when it's downward sloping, it tells us the short-term interest rate, which is the yield for the yield for short-term bonds is higher than long-term bond. Okay, that's why we code it as inverted. 27. Which of the following are reported as liabilities on bank's balance sheet? Okay. deposits with other banks, that is not uh, what it is. So since we deposit uh, money into another bank, so that is still our asset. Okay, so it will be counted as asset. And checkbook deposit is really common in the liability side. So I guess everybody knows it. And reserves is asset, that's just cash on hand. And consumer loans is something we make. So we expected someone to pay it back in the future. So that's asset as well. Okay. And 28. Which of the following is not a form of short-term liability in the shadow banking system? Okay, so shadow banking system is anything that is going to take people's money away for investment. But if they are receiving bank deposits, they are not shadow banking. They're real bank. They're your commercial banks. Okay, all the other things, the shadow banking is taking them. Uh, Okay, so 29. To prevent bank runs and the consequent bank failures, the United States established what in 1930? So as whenever you see deposit insurance, that's FDIC. Okay. Question 30. An inverted yield curve predicts that short-term interest rates will do what? Uh, well, when we see inverted interest rate, when we see inverted yield curve, it is going downward. All right. So basically, that means the short-term interest rate is higher than long-term interest rate. Okay. But we do know that your long-term interest rate, for example, if this is a 2-year bond, right? This is a 1-year bond. So obviously, right now, 1-year bond yield is higher than 2-year bond. So your I2T will equals to the average, right, of your I1T plus the future interest rate, which is I1T plus 1. Since this is greater than this one, so this is greater than this one, uh, by taking the average, that thing becomes smaller, means this number must be smaller, okay? Must be smaller than I1T. Otherwise, they will be a greater number than the I1T over here, all right? So let me give you an example. If I2T is like 3%, and I1T is 5%, right? You know the average of these two numbers. So this number and this number is 3%. So that means I1T has to be 1%. I1T plus 1 must be 1%. So the short-term interest rate drops by 4% this year. Okay. So even though the yield curve does not really show you, it's not a real prediction about the it's not a direct representation about the future short-term interest rate, but it does tells you uh, how does the market think the short-term interest rate will go in the future. Okay, so when you see inverted yield curve, it just tells us the short-term interest rate is going to fall in the future. Excess reserve, this is just the definition. Use your total reserve, all the money in hand, minus the required proportion, and the rest is excess reserve. Okay, and the banks are free to use their excess reserve money without have to meet the reserve requirement. How does it mean for a money market mutual fund to break the buck? Okay, so it is the word. Break the buck means the value of its share declines below $1. Okay, so money market mutual fund is super liquid. Um, it is considered as M2, so the broader definition of money. So the profit you're going to make by investing in money market mutual fund is super small. All right, so you put $1 in there, next year you got 1.0000 something out of it. But occasionally it does goes below $1, and that's a scenario where we call it as breaking the buck. Okay. Question 33. According to the liquidity premium theory, a yield curve that is flat means what? Okay, so let me tell you the answer first. We expect the future interest rate to fall in the future. Okay. Why is that? Because if we're talking about expectation theory, what is going on is that the long-term interest rate, for example, we have a flat yield curve, and now a long-term yield curve, a long-term yield, for example, this is 2-year, again, using the example of 2-year and 1-year bond. If they have identical number, but this number is the average of a 1-year bond over here and the 1-year bond next year, that just means, so I2t, again, I'm going to use this equation. I2t equals to I1t plus I1t plus 1, right? But since if this is, say, 5%, and I2t is 5%, that just tells me this is 5% as well, right? However, if you use liquidity premium theory, this is slightly different. Why? Because the formula has an extra term over here, right? This is I1t plus 1, I1t, sorry. And this is, oops, lost the drawing function. Yes, oops, what's going on? Okay, can I write on it? I guess not. Okay, here we go. All right, so this is I1t plus I1t plus 1. But remember, there's a liquidity premium term over there, which is greater than 0, right? So there's a liquidity premium over here. So if I plug in the same number, this is 5%, this is 5%, but over here, there is something that is greater than 0, say 1%. Then when we're calculating this number out, the I1t plus 1, we have to take this 5% minus a 1% first, which becomes 4% equals to 5%, 502, 1, t plus 1, right? So this thing becomes 3% in that instead of 5%. So when you're using liquidity premium theory, it will give you a more pessimistic future. All right, so it's less bright. It's more likely to be downwarded. Um, And that's why in the flat curve, if you're using expectation theory, everything is exactly the same. But when you're applying liquidity premium theory, it tells you that actually investors are not as confident as it seems to be. All right, so the right answer is C. Question 34. When a new depositor opens a checking account at the first national bank, the bank's asset and its liability does what? Okay, so first of all, if something happens to a bank, uh, the asset and liability are not changing at the same direction, it must be a wrong answer. Why? Because we call the T account also as a balance sheet, the bank's balance sheet, right? It has to be balanced. If asset increase, liability decrease, it won't be balanced, all right? So B and D are not right automatically, okay? And then things becomes easy, whether asset and liability increase or decrease, right? So since there's a new depositor that brings in money, so it is not hard to find the reserve actually increase when these people is making new deposit. And also, since he or she deposits more money, we have to mark that, okay, we own somebody else more money. So deposit is going to increase as well. So both of them is going to increase. 35. A 1-year, 2-year, 3-year bond currently pay 1.2%, 1.2%, and 1.6%. Respectively, what is the expected interest rate on 1-year bond 2 years from now, according to the expectation theory? Okay, so this is an expectation theory problem, so we don't have to worry about liquidity premium. Done. I'm going to draw the graph first. This is a 3-year bond problem. And let's draw out what is given, okay? So since it says the first one is 1-year bond, then I know a 1-year bond is going to pay me 1.2%. And then it's a 2-year bond that pays me 1.2%. So it has to be this one, right? So that the yield of this is also 1.2%. And a 3-year bond pays me 1.6%. So this is actually my 6%. And then we're trying to figure out a 1-year bond 2 years from now. What is the interest rate about that bond? So basically, that's this part, right? It's a 1-year bond. It goes only for 1 year. If this is today, and we're looking at 1 year from now and 2 years from now. So it starts from this point. Okay. So how to calculate it out? Basically, I know the 1.2 is the average of this number and the number over here, right? If we translate it into an equation, that is I to t 1.2% equals to the average of 1.2% plus x. Okay, so let's set this number as x. And this equation is going to tell us x equals to 1.2%, right? And if I set the thing I want to know as y, for a 3-year bond, I know that 1.6% is nothing but the average of 1.2% plus x plus y, right? And we calculate it out so we can plug in x in here. So that becomes 1.2%. So this equation tells us y equals to 3 times 1.6% is 4.8% divided by the total of 2.4% over here. So in total, y is 2.4%. Okay, and so the right answer is A for this question. Oops, where's my marker again? Oh, here. Okay. Question 36. Under the European system of central banks, the executive board is similar to structure of what? That's a board of governments. Okay, so we do have, we have board of governors as the executive board. That's how simple it is. Question 37. The strongest argument for an independent Federal Reserve rests on the view that subjecting the Fed to more political pressures would impart what? Okay. So, if you hear President Trump nowadays, okay, he's been arguing for a couple of things. The first thing is that we need to lower the interest rate. Right now, the Fed pushes to 0, but without this coronavirus thing, uh, uh, they don't plan to reduce the interest rate, right? They reduce the interest rate to boost the economy. Uh, but in good times, they want to increase the interest rate, which is going to hurt our economy by a little bit. Okay, but it does gives Fed power to save the world when something goes wrong. Okay, if we keep staying at 0% interest rate, then when something that is worse, that is bad, coming to us, there's no way. You've been reading the news saying that Fed is maybe out of bullet. They didn't admit it, but a lot of analysts think they're out of bullet right now because in the United States we probably decided not to go for negative interest rates. Okay. But for politicians, it is always good to put more money into the market. Okay, so that is an inflationary bias to monetary policy. Okay, so we want to print a lot of money to overheat the economy so that the economy looks good and people is going to voting for good economy. Okay, that's why 37 for question 37 we're selecting A. Question 38. Which of the following is an entity of the Federal Reserve System? Okay, so let me briefly explain. I lost my marker one more time. Where is it? Here it is. All right. So which of the following is an entity of Federal Reserve System? Right answer is A, FOMC. Okay, if you remember, FOMC conducts or makes the monetary policy, the open market policy for Fed. Okay, and it consists of the board of governors, 7 of them, and 5 presidents of each regional Federal Reserve banks. Okay, so it is completely under Federal Reserve System. FDIC, the one that gives the one that insure your deposits, is a separate company. Okay, it's not under the control of Federal Reserve System. The comptroller of the currency is different. Uh, it is more about the currency, okay, instead of the open market policy. And U.S. Treasury Secretary works for U.S. government. Okay, so and we know there's Fed system is totally independent from the government. Um, Question 39. Each Federal Reserve Bank has nine directors. Of these, who are appointed by member banks and who are appointed, how many of them are appointed by the Board of Governors? Okay, so you need to know this. There are three classes of these directors. So we have Class A, we have Class B, and we have Class C. Okay, and who do they represent? Class A represents the member banks. Member banks. All right. Class B represent the general public, and Class C represent the industry. Okay. Sorry for my handwriting, but you're hearing my voice, so it should be fine. And who elect all of them? So basically, Class A and Class B are all directors are elected by the member banks. And people who represent local industries are appointed by Board of Governments. Okay, so uh, the the structure is 6-3. All right. At 40, the Federal Reserve Bank of where houses open market desks. We talked about how important New York Fed is in the Federal Reserve System. So whenever the FOMC makes decisions about what kind of open market operations the Fed wants to implement, the New York Fed house the open market desk, who is in charge of the real who launched the missile out. Okay, so they're the one who is doing the operation. Okay, and good luck, everyone. And if you have more questions, always send me an email or or attend my office hour. Okay, uh, thank you very much, and good luck.